Good afternoon, delighted to be here. I thought I'd take you on a little tour, just for imagination. We tried the pink elephant thing, like don't think of a pink elephant. I'd like you to think of yourself as an Uber driver or as like a programmer who's doing web design on an on-demand platform, just for argument's sake, so you could follow what we've come up with. What you're going to have, or what you're not going to have. What you're not going to have is a work contract. You will have terms of service that you can either sign or disagree. In the event you disagree, unfortunately you're not going to have that job or those tasks. The next thing that we're not used to, or that you're not going to be used to, is that your wage is determined by the principle of an auction, most cases by undercutting. So we're not used to this. We are rather used to minimum wage. What you're also not used to is that you do not have a boss. A computer might be your boss, and he will allocate the tasks. And in the event that you like to discuss the conditions, like two of your Uber customers gave you a bad rating because they had a bad day, and you'd like to argue this, to who are you going to speak? So every one of us who's argued with computers knows that this can be very frustrating because they tend to be right always. For society, we have other consequences that are also affect the individual. We have the commoditization of labor, which means it's neatly arranged and systematized and bought off the virtual shelf. It's nothing bad about it. We ourselves, we source from platforms. We actually have an eye on where we buy, like the design of a website or some programming. But in the event, this is international competition. So we have, as the next point, the globalization of pricing for all, especially for all the services that are not rendered on site. Like if I'm an Uber driver here in Vienna, the government can still step in and determine some minimum wage and determine a legal framework. If I'm a programmer in Bangladesh or in Uruguay, there is nobody internationally who's going to regulate that market. And on Amazon Mechanical Turk, people work for $1 per hour on the average or below. And at the moment, we don't know how to go about this because self-exploitation is also happening in Europe and in the US, where people work according to those payment standards. So what we are going to see in this context was already talked about in the earlier panels, that we will have a strong increase in insecure contingent jobs. In the US, we had the shocker on Forbes, I think it was published in May, 40% of US workers are in insecure contingent jobs. This is really much. And so this tendency is going to go worldwide in any case. So we have to think about as a society how to go about this. So employment is slowly going to erode and slowly going to disappear. Companies will shrink considerably to more or less some strategic core. And like the CIO, like I'm standing here, I'm sourcing from networks. The chief communication officer will likely be part of a network, like hopefully social networks, otherwise he's going to be screwed. So we will do a lot of things with networks and shrink companies considerably, so they will also get used to sourcing their services from networks. So at this moment, I'd like to invite you to take the step back that we took at this moment, systematizing what's happening and what's going on. And we found some research that says there is a distinction in the type of work that we have in the sharing or labor on-demand economy. We have work above the algorithm and work below the algorithm. The work below the algorithm will receive the tasks from the platform, from the algorithm, and then the work above the algorithm will program the platform. And the next thing that happens here is that the ideology is programmed into the code, and the algorithm will exercise the ideology according to which everybody participating will work, will be paid or will pay. What does it mean? The Amazon Turk workers have found a quote, how they describe this phenomenon of the ideology in the algorithm. they say wage theft is a feature, not a bug. You know? I mean, it sounds, for the Amazon Turkers, it isn't that funny, but they use the terms of the IT to describe this. And as the next thing, if you see, this is what we do pattern recognition. So we take a step back, and yesterday Henry Mintzberg said in a seminar, every time it happens that you say, hang on, wait a minute. What happens here then is something that you realize about a system. And we thought there are several things happening. At the moment, we go from the industrial age to the network society. So everything happens networked. At the last turn of eras, there was also disruption going on. The early industrialists disrupted the craftsmen. Today, we wouldn't argue that this was entirely bad in the event and in the outcome, but it was a very heavy disruption of work. And these early industrialists were called the robber barons. I'm not sure if you know the term, and they could amass their wealth because they dictated the conditions of work and the wages. And they had no union as an opposition to negotiate that. This only came up just after that. If we take a cut to the next shift of societies from industrial age to the network society, we have maybe, let's call it, I'm very sorry for the term, the digital robber barons, who also dictate the terms, like $1 per hour for Amazon Turk workers. Not all the platforms are that bad. I'm just taking this very rough example, so you would excuse me to use that. And at that moment in time, we think, wait a minute, there is another difference. And the other difference is today, those robber barons, the new robber barons, they do not own the assets. You know, and in early industrialists, they owned the industry and the machines, and so they could actually determine how everybody else is going to work. Today, this is not the case. The largest taxi company in the world doesn't own a single taxi. The largest booking platform, Booking.com, doesn't own a single hotel or hotel room. The largest, apartment rental, Airbnb, doesn't own an apartment. The largest media concern, Facebook, doesn't own a single line of content. So the users and the workers bring in the assets, and they buy the car, and they maintain it, they pay for it. So it's like, to an extent, I would say a little bit worse in the conditions. And this is where I come to a conclusion where we said it's actually less about humans against robots, or the other way around. It's more the question that is also in the title of the conference, Claiming Our Humanity. It's more about how do humans deal with humans. And I think this is the discussion that we could actually have. My conclusion is that actually disagreeing with the previous panel is not less government, but I see a very strong role in government actually giving us also the terms and the forum for the discussion with the society, becoming a network themselves. So I strongly I would love to see government becoming a network themselves, disrupting themselves, because like at the last turn of centuries and last turn of eras, government, monarchy, was also disrupted by democracy. So this time we could do this as a society and not forget the achievements of like a couple of 100 years of social standards and minimum wages that we might just drop on the way while we think that the platforms themselves will organize that well.
Okay.
To conclude, for the first statements, there is one government who's trying to do that, to work as a network, and so I would recommend you listen to the talk of Mr. Müller tomorrow in the afternoon. He's describing how the city of Vienna is inviting people to discuss how to work in the future and how to work together. And for my statement, I'd conclude that this is the type of claiming our humanity, that we can actually see what were the achievements of society so far, and to understand what is up for disruption, like business models, and what is clearly not, like social standards. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.